It's 11:47 p.m. on a Sunday. You're sitting at your kitchen table, laptop open, a half-cold cup of coffee next to you, and you're doing the same mental calculation you've been doing for 6 months. You own one rental property. It cash flows, barely, and the question you keep running is, do I buy another one? The down payment would hurt. The mortgage application is exhausting. The tenants, the repairs, the calls at 9 p.m. on Christmas Eve about a leaking pipe. You remember all of it. And somewhere in the back of your head is this quiet, nagging thought, is this even worth it? Am I doing this right? Here's the thing. That question, is one more unit worth it, is almost never answered correctly. Not because the math is hard, because nobody runs the right math. Most people in your position are comparing the pain of acquisition to the reward of a single property. They're not seeing what the compounding picture actually looks like when you add one more door every 3 years for 20 years. The difference between someone who does that, one property every 3 years, and someone who stops at one is not a slightly better retirement. It is a completely different financial life. A life that is, for all practical purposes, untouchable. I want to show you exactly why. My name is Elena, and I spend way too much time thinking about why two people can start in the exact same financial position and end up in completely different worlds 20 years later, and why that gap almost always comes down to 1 or 2 repeatable decisions, not 100. Before we go further, not a financial advisor. This isn't financial advice, this is math, history, and a framework. Run everything by your own situation. If you've ever owned a rental and wondered whether adding one more is actually worth the pain, subscribe and hit the like button, because that exact question is what this video answers, with numbers. Let's run the math that most people never run, not on one property, on the gap between stopping and not stopping. The average small residential rental in the US appreciates at roughly 3 to 4% per year over long periods. Add a net cash flow of $400 to $600 a month on a properly purchased property, and the total return on invested equity across a 30-year period routinely lands between 8 and 12% annualized, depending on your market and management. Now imagine 2 people, same income, same credit score, same starting property. We'll call them Nathan and Claire. Nathan buys his first rental at 32. It works. He stops there. Life is busy. The next down payment feels like too much. He keeps the one property, refinances once, and coasts. Claire buys her first rental at 32. It also works. Then, at 35, she buys a second. At 38, a third. At 41, a fourth. One property every 3 years. By the time they're both 62, Nathan has one property worth roughly $480,000 with $190,000 in equity after a remaining mortgage, plus 30 years of cash flow he mostly reinvested into the house. Claire has 7 properties. Total portfolio value approximately $3.1 million. Combined equity across the portfolio $1.9 million. Monthly gross rental income $11,200. Net cash flow after all expenses and mortgages, $4,800 per month. Let me say that again, $4,800 per month, every month, in perpetuity, without selling a single asset. That is not a better retirement. That is a fundamentally different relationship with money, work, and time. Sit with that. And we haven't even touched what happens if Claire reinvests even a portion of that $4,800 monthly cash flow into index funds over the same 30 years. At a conservative 7% annualized return, $2,000 per month invested from age 45 to 60 compounds to approximately $740,000 in a brokerage account on top of the real estate portfolio. Nathan's W-2 is his only lever. Claire has 4. One property every 3 years didn't just build wealth, it built optionality, and optionality is what makes you untouchable. Here's where I need you to stay with me, because the second half of this video is where the math starts doing something genuinely strange. We're going to look at what makes Claire's approach actually work, and why most people who try to copy it fail at step 2. Here's what most people get wrong about the 1 every 3 years strategy. They think the hard part is the money, the down payment, the financing, the credit utilization. The trap here is the exhale. After you close on a property, especially if it's your first or second, there's a period of about 6 to 18 months where you are heads down managing it. Tenants, repairs, systems, learning. And then, sometime around month 20, things stabilize. The property is running, you take a breath. And that breath feels like arrival. It is not arrival. It is the exact moment you need to start getting ready for the next one. But the exhale feels so much like permission to rest that most investors stop there, indefinitely. The 3-year cadence is specifically designed to beat this trap. Year 1, acquire and stabilize. Year 2, optimize cash flow and begin saving the next down payment from rental income. Year 3, underwrite 3 to 5 properties and close on the best one. Then repeat. The 3-year cadence is specifically designed to beat this trap. Year 1, acquire and stabilize. Year 2, optimize cash flow and begin saving the next down payment from rental income. Year 3, underwrite 3 to 5 properties and close on the best one. Then repeat. This is not a hustle strategy, it is a pacing strategy. There's a critical difference. Hustle requires unsustainable intensity. Pacing requires showing up at the same moderate intensity forever. The second one builds a portfolio. The first one builds burnout and a reason to quit at property 2. The 3 years isn't random. It maps almost exactly to the stabilization, recovery, and acquisition cycle. You're not grinding, you're pacing. By year 6 or 7, most buy and hold investors have something that looks like real wealth on paper, a property worth $380,000. Growing equity. Appreciation charts that look good. The trap disguises itself as financial security. Here's what nobody tells you. Idle equity in a rental property is one of the most expensive forms of money you can hold. It earns zero. It doesn't cash flow, it just sits there appreciating at the same rate regardless of how much of it you have locked in. A Harvard Joint Center for Housing Studies analysis found that residential real estate appreciation averages right around 3.8% annually in inflation-adjusted terms over long periods. That's your equity, growing at 3.8%. Meanwhile, that same equity deployed into another rental via a cash-out refinance or a portfolio loan is generating both appreciation and cash flow. That's the difference between money working once and money working twice. Claire doesn't leave equity idle. Every 3 years, she runs a simple calculation. What is my current equity on each property, and what would that equity return if redeployed versus parked? If the redeployment math works, she moves. Nathan never runs that calculation. He mistakes the growing number on Zillow for a strategy. Think about it this way. If you had $120,000 sitting in a savings account, earning 0.5%, you'd consider that a problem worth solving. But that same $120,000 sitting as idle equity in a paid-down rental, not leveraged, not redeployed, just accumulating slowly, is treated as financial virtue. It isn't. It's the same problem in a different psychological costume. The villain here isn't the bank, it isn't the market, it's the human tendency to confuse safety with strategy. They feel identical. They are not. That's not a strategy. That's just asset ownership. They are not the same thing. There's a real estate investor named Ann Scheiber who retired from the IRS in 1944 on a government pension of $3,100 a year. No inheritance, no windfall. She simply made one repeatable decision: put money into income-producing assets, reinvest what they produce, buy more over time, and she executed it without interruption for 50 years. She left $22 million to Yeshiva University when she died at 101, not from a single big bet, from a process. You don't need $22 million. You need the version of that process that works for real estate. One door, 3 years. Another door, repeat. The process is the asset. The properties are just where you store the result. Here's the objection I hear most often at this point in the conversation. What about debt? You're describing taking on more and more mortgages. What happens when the market drops? What happens when a tenant stops paying? What happens when interest rates spike and your cash flow turns negative? I'm going to steelman this. That argument is not wrong. Leverage amplifies losses the same way it amplifies gains. Over-leveraged real estate investors got annihilated in 2008. This is real. But here's the trap inside the fear. Most people who cite 2008 as a reason to avoid building a portfolio are not actually analyzing 2008. They're using 2008 as emotional cover for the acquisition exhaustion trap we talked about earlier. They had the exhale moment. They needed a rational-sounding reason to stay put, and 2008 gave them one. The investors who failed in 2008 were not the people who bought one property every 3 years with conservative underwriting. They were the people who bought 5 properties in 18 months with 100% financing, negative cash flow from day one, and a business model that depended entirely on appreciation continuing forever. Conservative leverage, 20 to 25% equity maintained per property, positive cash flow at a 7% vacancy assumption, no more than 1 acquisition per acquisition cycle, is not what broke in 2008. Reckless leverage broke in 2008. The boring choice is not the consolation prize. It is the strategy. Let's return to Nathan and Claire. By age 44, Claire has 4 properties. Nathan has 1. Here's where the second gap opens, and it's invisible until it isn't. Nathan manages his 1 property himself. Weekend calls, lease renewals, minor repairs. It costs him maybe 4 to 6 hours a month. He considers this a feature, not a bug. Low overhead. Claire, at property 3, did the math on self-management and made a different decision. She hired a property manager at 8% of gross rents. Her net cash flow per property dropped by roughly $180 per month. She considered this a business expense, not a loss. Because here's what the property manager actually bought her: the ability to keep acquiring, the mental bandwidth to underwrite new deals, the time to have conversations with lenders, attorneys, and other investors, the freedom from the 9 p.m. Christmas Eve plumbing call. Nathan's 1 property ceiling is self-imposed, not by the market, not by money, by management bandwidth. He cannot imagine adding property 4 because properties 1 through 3, self-managed, already feel like a second job. Claire's portfolio feels manageable at 7 properties because she built the infrastructure at property 3. The 8% is not a cost. It is leverage on her own time, which is the only asset that does not compound and cannot be replaced. There is no trophy for self-managing. There's only opportunity cost. Let me tell you what financially untouchable actually means, because it is not what most people picture. It doesn't mean immune to recessions. It doesn't mean guaranteed returns. It doesn't mean you never have a bad tenant or a rough year. It means this: your income is no longer contingent on your labor. Your lifestyle is no longer contingent on your employer. Your financial survival in any single bad year is no longer dependent on a single asset, a single income stream, or a single decision made by someone else at a company you don't control. A Dalbar study on investor behavior found that the average equity investor underperforms the market by roughly 3 to 4% annually over 20-year periods. Not because markets are bad, but because human beings make emotionally driven decisions at the worst possible moments. They sell in downturns. They buy in euphoria. They stop contributing when times are hard. Real estate doesn't give you the same option. When the market corrects, you can't panic sell a tenanted property in 48 hours. The illiquidity that terrifies most investors is actually a behavioral protection. It forces the holding that produces the return. Claire, at 62, with $4,800 per month in net cash flow, could lose her job tomorrow, go through a 2-year market downturn, have 3 months of vacancy across her portfolio, and still cover her basic life expenses from rental income alone. Nathan, at 62, cannot say any of that. He has 1 income stream, 1 employer, 1 property that generates enough income to cover 1 utility bill. That asymmetry did not appear overnight. The Federal Reserve's survey of consumer finances consistently shows that among households in the top wealth quintile, the single biggest differentiator is not income. It is the number of income-producing assets they hold, not the value. The number. Diversification across cash-flowing assets is the structural feature that insulates against the single-point failures that quietly destroy middle-class financial lives. Claire built that structure in 7 quiet acquisitions across 30 years. Nobody noticed. That's the point. Here's the specific sequence. Not a philosophy, a sequence. Step 1. If you own one property, your job right now is not to acquire. Your job is to optimize. Get your existing property to its maximum stable cash flow, proper rents, locked-in leases, minor improvements that lift value. Give yourself 12 months of clean operating data. Step 2. Build the acquisition fund in parallel. Your cash flow from property 1 plus a specific monthly transfer from your primary income, even $400 to $600 a month, goes into a dedicated account labeled nothing but next acquisition. Don't touch it. Don't reframe it as an emergency fund. It is not an emergency fund. Step 3. In month 24, start underwriting markets. Not daydreaming. Actual numbers. Cap rate, gross rent multiplier, vacancy assumptions, local property management cost, estimated CapEx reserve. Build your underwriting muscle so that when you're ready at month 30 to 36, you're not learning how to analyze deals. You're just executing on 1. Step 4. Close on property 2. Hire a property manager from day 1, not because you can't manage it, because you are now running a real estate business, not a landlord hobby. Businesses have systems. Businesses scale. Hobbies have ceilings. And one more thing. The moment you have 2 properties under professional management, run a quarterly portfolio review. 1 page. Cap rate per property, vacancy rate, maintenance spend as a percentage of gross income, and equity to value ratio. That document will tell you every quarter whether you're on track, whether you should refinance, and whether property 3 is ready to be underwritten. It keeps you inside the strategy instead of drifting back into passive ownership. Then repeat. The cadence takes care of everything else. The gap between Claire and Nathan did not open at 62. It did not open at 50. It opened in 100 small moments across 30 years. Every time Claire chose the next acquisition cycle over the comfortable exhale. Every time she treated her portfolio as a machine to be built rather than a number to be watched. You can choose not to play this game. 1 property is genuinely better than none. A W-2 with a pension is a completely legitimate strategy. There is no judgment here. But if you are lying awake at 11:47 p.m., running the math on whether to buy the next one, your gut is already telling you the answer. You're not looking for permission to stop. You're looking for the framework to go. But if you are lying awake at 11:47 p.m., running the math on whether to buy the next one, your gut is already telling you the answer. You're not looking for permission to stop. You're looking for the framework to go. The only scoreboard that actually matters is the one nobody can see. Not the car in the driveway, not the neighborhood, not the title. The number of systems you have working for you at 2 in the morning while you're asleep. 1 extra rental every 3 years. Not from luck, not from a hot market, from a repeatable process executed quietly, without fanfare, for 2 decades. That's what financially untouchable looks like. Not a headline, not a windfall, a cadence. This is hard to build alone with a YouTube video. Knowing the framework is step 1. Knowing which market to enter next, how to underwrite your specific property type, and how to structure the acquisition so it doesn't crush your primary finances, that's a different conversation. Subscribe if this kind of math is what you want more of. I'll see you there.